Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to medieval England, to a world of monasteries and market towns, of alehouses and apothecaries, of physic gardens and herb-scented infirmaries, and we are going to explore something you might not expect from so distant an age: the drugs, the medicines, the drinks, and the remedies that the people of the Middle Ages relied upon. So, before you settle in, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from in the world and what time it is. It's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and I find it comforting to imagine all of us, scattered across the world, lying awake in the dark together, drifting back through the years. Also, tap that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure at all. I will be here regardless, talking quietly in the dark about the long, strange history of how people used to live. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for some soft background hum, and get comfortable, because we have a long and gentle journey ahead of us tonight, back through the centuries to a world very different from our own. You do not need to remember any of it. Have you ever wondered what people actually drank in the Middle Ages, when the water itself could not be trusted? Have you ever wondered what a medieval healer reached for when someone was in pain, or could not sleep, or burned with fever? Have you ever wondered what strange plants and potions filled the apothecaries' shelves, what the monks grew in their walled gardens, what powers people believed lay hidden in herbs and spices and roots? These are the things we are going to drift through tonight, slowly, in the dark, the whole quiet pharmacy of the medieval world. So settle back, let your eyes grow heavy, and let us travel together to an age of herbs and ale and old remedies, when the line between medicine and magic was still a blurry one, and every plant seemed to hold a secret. Let us begin, gently, with the world itself, with the way the medieval mind understood the substances around it. To understand the drugs and remedies of medieval England, we have to begin by setting aside almost everything we know about medicine today, and entering a world that understood the body and the substances that acted upon it in an entirely different way. For the medieval world had no notion of the things we now take for granted, no knowledge of germs or chemistry as we understand them, no laboratories or clinical trials, no pharmacies of carefully measured and tested medicines. What it had instead was a rich and ancient tradition of herbal lore, a body of belief about the powers of plants and other substances, and a whole philosophy of the body that shaped how every remedy was understood and used. In this world, the word we might translate as drug did not mean what it means to us. It meant, above all, a medicine, a substance used to heal, and the medieval pharmacy was overwhelmingly a pharmacy of plants. Herbs were the foundation of medieval medicine, gathered from the fields and woods, grown in gardens, dried and stored and prepared in countless ways, each believed to possess particular virtues and powers. Alongside the herbs were other substances, roots and barks and seeds, minerals and animal products, and the precious spices and drugs carried from distant lands. But it was the herbs, the green and growing things, that formed the heart of the medieval healer's art. To know medicine was, above all, to know plants, their names and natures and uses, the ailments they eased and the dangers they carried. Underlying all of this was a particular understanding of the body, inherited from the ancient world, which held that health depended on the balance of 4 fluids or humours within the body, and that illness arose when these humours fell out of balance. Each substance, each herb and food and drink, was understood to have qualities, to be warming or cooling, moistening or drying, and the healer's task was to use these qualities to restore the balance that illness had disturbed, countering an excess of one humour with substances of the opposite quality. This theory, which we shall explore more fully later, gave a logic and a structure to the use of every remedy, a reason why this herb was given for that ailment, a whole system of understanding that made sense of the vast and various pharmacy of the age. It is worth pausing, too, on how central this whole world of substances was to medieval life, how large it loomed in the daily experience of ordinary people. In an age of hard living and frequent illness, of pain that could not be reliably eased and sickness that came often and struck hard, the substances that could heal, or comfort, or bring rest, or simply sustain the body through the day were of enormous importance, woven into the very fabric of survival. The ale that nourished and refreshed, the herbs that eased the countless ills of the body, the remedies reached for in times of sickness, the precious drugs that offered relief from pain. All of these were not marginal curiosities but central necessities, deeply bound up with the business of staying alive and well in a hard world. To understand the substances of medieval England is thus to understand something fundamental about medieval life itself, about how people sustained and healed and comforted themselves in an age so much harder than our own. The knowledge of all this was held and passed down in various ways, in the great tradition of learned medicine studied by physicians, in the herbals and books of remedies that catalogued the plants and their uses, in the practical lore of the monasteries and their infirmaries, and in the folk knowledge of the countless ordinary healers, the wise women and cunning folk and village practitioners who tended the sick in every community. It was a knowledge both learned and popular, written in books and carried in memory, a vast inheritance of belief and practice about the substances that could heal and harm, passed down through the generations and drawn upon whenever illness or pain or sleeplessness came calling. And woven all through this world of medicine was something else, something that we would separate out but that the medieval mind did not, the presence of religion and magic, of prayer and charm and ritual, bound up together with the herbs and potions in a single fabric of healing. The line between medicine and magic, between the natural virtue of a plant and the supernatural power of a charm, was not sharply drawn in the medieval mind, and remedies mingled the practical and the spiritual freely, the herb and the prayer, the potion and the ritual, all part of a single effort to heal in a world where the natural and the supernatural were not neatly divided. It is into this rich and strange world, this world of herbs and humours and half-magical remedies, that we are going to wander tonight. Let that sense of the medieval pharmacy settle softly in the dark. We turn now to the substance that the people of medieval England relied upon above all others, the ale that filled their cups from morning to night. Let us begin our journey through the substances of medieval England with the one that touched nearly every life, every day, from the youngest to the oldest, the drink that was as ordinary and essential as bread itself, ale. For in medieval England, ale was not a luxury or an occasional indulgence, but a staple of daily life, drunk by nearly everyone, at nearly every meal, in quantities that might astonish us now, forming a fundamental part of the ordinary diet in a way that is hard for us to imagine. The reason for this lay, in large part, in the difficulty of finding clean water to drink. In a world without any understanding of what made water safe or unsafe, and with water supplies that were often contaminated in ways that could cause illness, water was frequently not a reliable thing to drink, particularly in the towns. Ale, by contrast, was made through a process that rendered it safer, and it carried nourishment as well, so that it became the sensible everyday drink, the thing people reached for to quench their thirst and sustain themselves. It was, in a real sense, a food as much as a drink, providing calories and sustenance as well as refreshment, a basic part of how people nourished themselves each day. The ale of everyday life was often quite weak, a mild and lightly alcoholic drink, sometimes called small ale, brewed to be an everyday thirst quencher rather than anything strong. And it was this weak ale that was drunk in the greatest quantities, by everyone including children, as the ordinary drink of the household. Stronger ales existed too, brewed for feasts and special occasions, or for those who wished for something with more potency. But the daily drink was typically the milder sort, consumed throughout the day as the normal accompaniment to life and labour. People drank ale with their breakfast, with their midday meal, with their supper, and in between, a steady flow of the mild brew that formed the liquid foundation of the medieval day. The making of ale was a common domestic task, carried out in countless households, and it was very often the work of women, the alewives who brewed the ale for their own families and frequently for sale to others as well. Brewing was one of the ordinary skills of the medieval household, a regular part of domestic labour, and the alewife who brewed a good ale and sold the surplus was a familiar figure, turning her domestic skill into a small trade. The ale did not keep for long, and so it had to be brewed frequently, a continual round of production to keep the household and the neighbourhood supplied. The alewives at their brewing a constant feature of medieval life. It was a homely, everyday craft, woven into the fabric of ordinary existence. So central was ale to medieval life that it was woven into the very economy and regulation of the age, its price and quality controlled by law, its brewing and selling a significant part of local trade and custom. The authorities took a close interest in ale, concerned to ensure that it was sold at fair prices and of proper quality, and there were rules and officials devoted to overseeing its production and sale, a measure of how important this everyday drink was to the life of the community. Ale was not a marginal thing but a central one, essential to daily life, embedded in the economy, regulated by law, brewed in every neighbourhood, and drunk by nearly everyone, the great everyday substance of medieval England. Let that picture of the ever-present ale settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the social world that gathered around this drink, to the ale house and its place in medieval life. Where there was ale, there gathered people, and so around this everyday drink there grew up a whole social world, a place of meeting and gossip and rest, of warmth and company against the hardness of medieval life, the alehouse. For the alehouse was far more than simply a place to buy a drink. It was one of the central social institutions of the medieval community, a gathering place where people came together, and it played a role in the life of the ordinary person that is worth pausing to appreciate. The alehouse, in its simplest form, was often little more than an ordinary house where the alewife or brewer sold ale, marked perhaps by a sign or a bush hung outside to show that fresh ale was ready, welcoming neighbours in to drink and sit and talk. There was frequently nothing grand about it, no elaborate premises, just a room in a house where people gathered to share the ale that had been brewed, sitting together on benches, drinking and talking in the warmth. It was a homely, informal place, woven into the ordinary fabric of the neighbourhood, a natural gathering point for the local community, where people came together in the course of ordinary life. For the ordinary people of medieval England, the alehouse offered something precious, a place of warmth, company, and relaxation, a respite from the hardness of labour and the cramped discomfort of home. In a world of hard work and simple dwellings, the alehouse was a place to gather with others, to share news and gossip, to rest and be sociable, to enjoy the warmth of company and the ease that the ale brought. It was a place where friendships were maintained, where the news of the neighbourhood was exchanged, where people came together in fellowship, a vital centre of social life for those whose lives were otherwise filled with toil. The comfort it offered, of company and warmth and rest, was a real and valued thing in hard lives. The alehouse was also a place of entertainment and recreation, where people might play games, sing, and amuse themselves, finding in its warmth a rare space for pleasure and diversion. Various games and pastimes were enjoyed in and around the alehouse, and it was a place where people could relax and be merry, seeking the simple pleasures that brightened the hardness of life. In an age with few of the diversions we now take for granted, the alehouse offered a precious space for recreation and enjoyment, a place to set aside the cares of labour for a while and enjoy the company and the games and the ease that it provided. It was, in its humble way, a centre of pleasure as well as of sociability. But the alehouse had its shadows too. for it was also a place where the harms of excessive drinking could gather, where disputes and disorder could arise, where the drink that brought warmth and fellowship could also bring trouble. The authorities and the moralists of the age often viewed the alehouse with some suspicion, concerned about the disorder and excess that could accompany drinking, the quarrels and the drunkenness, and the neglect of duty that could follow from too much time and too much ale. The alehouse was thus a place of some ambivalence, valued for the warmth and fellowship it offered, but also watched warily as a potential source of trouble, its pleasures shadowed by its dangers. It was, like the drink at its heart, a thing of both comfort and concern. Let that picture of the alehouse settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a finer and costlier drink, the wine that graced the tables of the wealthy. If ale was the everyday drink of ordinary people, there was another drink that carried a different status altogether, a drink of refinement and wealth and special occasion, prized and costly, and associated with the higher ranks of society, wine. For wine held a particular place in medieval England, valued above the common ale, drunk by those who could afford it, and surrounded by an air of quality and status that ale did not possess. Wine was, for the most part, an imported luxury in medieval England, for the English climate did not readily produce wine in the quantities or quality that were desired, and so much of the wine drunk in England was brought from across the sea, from the wine-producing regions of the continent. This importation made wine costlier than the locally brewed ale, a drink that had travelled far to reach the English table, carrying with it the prestige of its foreign origin and the expense of its transport. Wine was thus, by its very nature, a drink of some expense and status, more readily available to the wealthy than to the ordinary person, associated with those who could afford the finer and costlier things of life. Among the wealthy and the noble, wine was a valued and expected part of the table, served at feasts and important occasions, enjoyed by those of rank as a mark of their status and a pleasure of their position. The great households consumed wine in considerable quantities, and the ability to serve good wine was part of the display of wealth and hospitality that marked the noble table. For those of high rank, wine was not an occasional luxury, but a regular part of life, an expected accompaniment to their meals and gatherings, a drink that befitted their station and expressed their standing in the world. It flowed at the tables of the great, a liquid emblem of wealth and refinement. Wine held a special place too in the life of the Church, for it was essential to the celebration of the Mass, the central rite of medieval Christianity, and this gave it a sacred as well as a social significance. The religious importance of wine ensured its place in the life of the age, and the monasteries and churches required it for their sacred rites, adding a spiritual dimension to this already valued drink. The monasteries, indeed, were often significant producers and consumers of wine where conditions allowed, and the connection between wine and the church gave it a dignity and importance beyond its role as a mere beverage. Wine was thus woven into the sacred as well as the social fabric of the age. Wine was also valued for its supposed qualities in matters of health, for within the medical thinking of the age, it was regarded as having beneficial properties, warming and strengthening, and it was used in various medicinal preparations as well as drunk for pleasure and sustenance. The healers of the age often regarded wine as wholesome and beneficial in moderation, and it featured in remedies and regimens of health, valued for the qualities it was thought to possess. This medicinal esteem added yet another dimension to wine's standing, making it not only a drink of pleasure and status and sacred use, but also a substance credited with real benefits to health. In all these ways, wine occupied a special and elevated place among the drinks of medieval England. Let that picture of the wine of the wealthy settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the darker side of drink, and to what the age thought of those who drank too much. For all that ale and wine were woven into the ordinary fabric of medieval life, valued and enjoyed and relied upon, The age was not blind to the harms that could come from too much drink, and there was a real awareness of the trouble that drunkenness could bring, a concern expressed by the Church, the moralists, and the authorities alike. We shall consider this soberly, for it reflects the age's own recognition that the substances it relied upon could also do harm. The Church, in particular, took a serious view of the sin of excessive drinking, regarding drunkenness as a moral failing, a loss of the reason and self-control that distinguished a person, and a gateway to other sins and follies. The teachings of the age warned against the excesses of drink, counselling moderation and temperance, and holding up drunkenness as a vice to be avoided, a weakness that led people into folly and sin, and the neglect of their duties to God and their fellows. This moral concern was a serious and consistent theme, for the Church saw in drunkenness a real danger to the soul as well as the body, a surrendering of the higher faculties to the base pleasures of drink. Moderation was the counsel, and excess the sin. Beyond the moral concern, there was a practical awareness of the disorder and harm that excessive drinking could cause, the quarrels and violence, the accidents and misfortunes, the neglect of work and family that could follow from too much ale or wine. The authorities were concerned with maintaining order, and drunkenness was recognized as a source of the disturbances and troubles that threatened it, a cause of the disputes and disorders that could disrupt the peace of the community. The harms of drink were thus not only spiritual but social and practical, a matter of real concern to those responsible for the good order of medieval life, who saw in excessive drinking a threat to the peace and well-being of the community. At the same time, the age held a somewhat accepting attitude toward ordinary drinking, recognizing the central place of ale in daily life, and not condemning drink itself, but only its excess. The concern was with drunkenness, with the loss of control and the harms it brought, not with the moderate drinking that was simply a normal part of life. There was thus a distinction drawn between the acceptable use of drink, woven into the ordinary fabric of existence, and the sinful and harmful excess that led to trouble, a distinction that allowed the age to embrace its everyday ale while condemning the drunkenness that could follow from too much of it. It was a matter of degree, of moderation against excess, rather than a condemnation of drink itself. This awareness of the harms of drink reminds us that the people of the age were not naive about the substances they relied upon, but understood, in their own way, that these things could harm as well as help, that the ale and wine that sustained and comforted them could also, in excess, do real damage to body and soul and community. It is a recognition that runs through the whole story of the substances of medieval England, this awareness that the things that healed and comforted could also harm, that virtue and danger were often bound up together in the same substance, a matter of use and moderation and degree. The medieval world knew its comforts could become its curses. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now from drink to medicine, and to the shop where the remedies of the age were prepared and sold, the apothecary. Let us turn now from the drinks of medieval England to its medicines, and to the figure who dealt in them, who gathered and prepared and sold the substances used to heal, the apothecary. For the apothecary was the keeper of the medieval pharmacy, the one who stocked and supplied the vast array of substances that the healers of the age drew upon, and his shop was a place of wonder, filled with the drugs and remedies of the medieval world. The apothecary dealt in what was known as the materia medica, the whole body of substances used in medicine, and this was an astonishingly various collection, ranging from common local herbs to rare and exotic substances carried from the far corners of the known world. His shop held the dried herbs and roots and barks and seeds of countless plants, the minerals and earths used in medicine, the animal products that featured in remedies, and above all the precious drugs and spices imported from distant lands, the costly substances that came from far away and commanded high prices. It was a treasury of healing substances, gathered from near and far, stocked and stored and prepared for use in the remedies of the age. Among the most valued of these substances were the imported drugs and spices that came from distant lands, carried along the long trade routes that connected medieval Europe to the wider world, arriving in England after journeys of great length and expense. These exotic substances, spices and gums and resins and rare drugs from far-off places, were highly prized and costly, valued both for their use in medicine and for their rarity and expense. The trade in these substances was a significant one, part of the great network of commerce that carried precious goods across vast distances, and the apothecary who stocked them dealt in some of the most valuable substances of the age, the rare drugs that had travelled far to reach his shelves. Preparing the medicines was a skilled business, for the raw substances had to be processed and combined in various ways to make the remedies that were actually used, the powders and pills, the syrups and electuaries, the ointments and plasters and draughts. The apothecary ground and mixed and compounded the substances according to the recipes of the age, transforming the raw materia medica into the finished remedies, a craft that required knowledge and skill and care. This work of preparation was central to the apothecary's art, the turning of herbs and drugs and other substances into the medicines that the physicians prescribed and the sick consumed, a practical craft of processing and combining that lay at the heart of medieval pharmacy. The apothecary thus occupied an important place in the medical world of medieval England, the supplier of the substances on which healing depended, the keeper of the pharmacy, the preparer of remedies, a figure of real significance in the care of the sick. His shop, with its jars and drawers and shelves of herbs and drugs and spices, its sense of the many substances it held, its air of exotic and mysterious wares, was one of the wonders of the medieval town, a treasury of healing, and a gateway to the strange and various pharmacy of the age. From his stores came the substances that eased pain and fought fever, and treated the countless ills of medieval life, the raw materials of the healer's art. Let that picture of the apothecary's shop settle gently in the dark. We turn now to another great centre of medicine in the medieval world, the monastery and its infirmary. Beyond the apothecary's shop, there was another great centre of medicine and healing in medieval England, a place where the care of the sick was pursued with particular dedication, and where much of the medical knowledge of the age was preserved and practiced, the monastery. For the monasteries were among the most important sites of healing in the medieval world, their infirmaries tending the sick, their gardens growing the herbs of medicine, their libraries preserving the knowledge of remedies, a role that made them vital to the medical life of the age. The monastery had a religious duty to care for the sick, for the tending of the ill and suffering was regarded as a Christian obligation, an act of charity and mercy that the monastic life embraced. And so the monasteries maintained infirmaries where the sick were cared for, both the members of the community who fell ill and, often, others from beyond the monastery walls who came seeking help. The care of the sick was woven into the very purpose of the monastic life, an expression of the Christian duty of charity, and the infirmary was a place where this duty was fulfilled, where the ill were tended with the care that faith demanded. This religious motivation gave the monasteries a particular dedication to healing, a commitment rooted in their spiritual calling. The monasteries were also great preservers and transmitters of medical knowledge, for in an age when books were rare and precious and produced by hand, the monastic libraries held and copied the texts of medicine, preserving the inherited wisdom of the ancient and medieval worlds. The monks studied these texts, learned the remedies they contained, and passed the knowledge down through the generations, maintaining a tradition of medical learning that might otherwise have been lost. The monastery was thus a repository of medical knowledge as well as a place of practical healing, its libraries preserving the written wisdom of medicine, its members studying and applying it, a crucial link in the chain of medical knowledge across the centuries. In the quiet of the monastic library, the remedies of the age were preserved and studied, The practical work of healing in the monastery drew heavily on herbs, on the plants grown in the monastic gardens, and gathered from the surrounding country, prepared into the remedies that the infirmary used. The monks cultivated the herbs of medicine, tended their gardens with care, and prepared from them the medicines they needed, combining the practical knowledge of plants with the learned knowledge of their texts. The monastery infirmary was thus a place where herb and book came together, where the growing of medicinal plants met the study of medical learning, producing the remedies that cared for the sick. It was a centre of both the practical and the learned aspects of medieval medicine, uniting garden and library in the service of healing. In all these ways, the monastery stood as one of the great pillars of medieval medicine, a place of practical healing and preserved knowledge, of charitable care and cultivated herbs, its infirmaries and gardens and libraries together forming a centre of medical life that served both the monastic community and the wider world. The dedication of the monasteries to the care of the sick, rooted in their religious calling and supported by their learning and their gardens, made them vital to the healing of the age, a refuge for the ill and a treasury of medical knowledge. The herb-scented infirmary, with its careful monks and its shelves of remedies, was one of the enduring institutions of medieval healing. Let that peaceful picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the gardens where the herbs of medicine were grown, the physic gardens of the age. At the heart of medieval medicine, whether in the monastery or the manor or the humble cottage, lay the growing of herbs, the cultivation of the plants from which so many remedies were made, and this gave rise to a particular and lovely feature of the medieval world, the physic garden, the garden devoted to the herbs of healing. For the medicinal herbs on which medicine depended had to be grown and gathered, and the tending of a garden of healing plants was a common and important practice, a quiet and fragrant corner of the medieval world. The physic garden was a garden given over to the cultivation of medicinal herbs, laid out with beds of the plants used in healing, tended with care so as to provide the remedies that the household or community needed. In the monasteries, such gardens were an important part of the infirmary's work, supplying the herbs for its medicines. In the households of the wealthy, gardens of herbs were maintained for the health of the family. And even the humblest cottage might have its patch of useful herbs, the plants that the housewife used in her remedies. The growing of medicinal herbs was thus widespread, from the great monastic gardens to the small cottage plots, a common feature of medieval life, rooted in the universal need for the herbs of healing. The herbs grown in these gardens were many and various, each valued for its particular virtues, its uses in the treatment of the ailments that afflicted medieval people. There were herbs for soothing and herbs for stimulating, herbs for the stomach and herbs for the head, herbs to ease pain and herbs to bring sleep, herbs for wounds and herbs for fevers, a whole pharmacy of growing plants, each with its place in the healer's art. The knowledge of these herbs, their names and natures and uses, was a vital part of medical understanding, and the physic garden was a living collection of this knowledge, a place where the plants of healing grew in ordered beds, ready to be gathered and prepared into remedies. To walk in such a garden was to walk among the medicines of the age. The tending of the physic garden followed the rhythms of the seasons, the planting and growing and harvesting of the herbs, the gathering of them at the proper times when their virtues were thought to be strongest, the drying and storing of them for use through the year. This was a knowledgeable and careful work, for the herbs had to be grown well and gathered rightly and preserved properly to retain their healing powers, and those who tended the physic gardens needed to understand the plants and their requirements. The garden was thus a place of patient and seasonal labour, tended through the turning year to provide the herbs on which healing depended, its beds yielding their harvest of medicinal plants to be prepared and stored against the needs of the sick. There is something peaceful and appealing in the image of the medieval physic garden, this quiet, fragrant place where the herbs of healing grew in ordered beds, tended by careful hands, yielding the plants from which the remedies of the age were made. It represents the gentler and more hopeful side of medieval medicine, the patient cultivation of the plants that could ease suffering and restore health, the union of care and knowledge and nature in the service of healing. In the physic garden, with its rows of herbs and its seasonal rhythms and its quiet purpose, we see medieval medicine at its most wholesome, rooted in the green and growing things of the earth. Let that fragrant picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one of the most important of all the medicinal plants, the one that could ease pain and bring sleep, the poppy. Among all the plants of the medieval pharmacy, few were more valued or more powerful than the one that could do what little else could do in that age of hard suffering, ease pain and bring sleep. This was the poppy, and the substance derived from it, long known to the medical traditions that the medieval world inherited, held a place of particular importance among the remedies of the age. We shall speak of it soberly and gently, for it touches on the serious matter of pain and its relief in a world that had so little to offer against suffering. In an age without the pain relief we now take for granted, suffering was a constant and often unrelievable companion of illness and injury, and anything that could ease pain was of enormous value. The poppy, and the preparations made from it, were known to have the power to dull pain and bring sleep, and this made them precious in a world where pain so often could not be relieved at all. To be able to ease the agony of a suffering person, to bring rest to one tormented by pain, was a rare and valuable power, and the substances derived from the poppy offered it, making them among the most important of the medieval pharmacy's resources against suffering. In the relief of pain, they could do what almost nothing else could. The medical traditions that the medieval world inherited from the ancient world and from the learned medicine of other cultures knew of the poppy and its powers, and this knowledge was preserved and transmitted in the medical texts of the age. The learned physicians knew of the substance and its uses, and it featured in the medical knowledge that the monasteries and the learned tradition preserved, a valued part of the inherited pharmacy of pain relief. This was not a folk discovery, but a piece of learned medical knowledge, passed down through the texts and traditions of medicine, understood by those versed in the medical learning of the age as one of the most powerful of the substances available for the relief of suffering. Yet the power of the poppy was also understood to be a dangerous one, for the very strength that made it able to ease pain and bring sleep made it perilous, capable of harm if not used with the greatest care. The medical understanding of the age recognized that this was a powerful and potentially dangerous substance, to be handled carefully and used with caution, for its effects could be hazardous. This awareness of its danger, alongside its value, meant that it was regarded with a certain wariness, even as it was prized for its powers, a substance of both great usefulness and real peril, to be approached with the respect and caution that its potency demanded. The medieval world knew that this most valuable of pain relievers was also among the most dangerous of substances. We shall not go into the details of how such substances were prepared or used, for that is neither our purpose nor a fitting subject for our quiet journey tonight. What matters for our story is simply to understand the place that the poppy held in the medieval pharmacy, as one of the most valued and most powerful of the substances available for the relief of pain and the bringing of sleep, precious in an age of hard suffering, yet dangerous in its strength, regarded with both esteem and caution by the healers of the age. It stands as a vivid example of the medieval pharmacy at its most potent, a substance of real power in a world that had so little to set against pain, valued and feared in equal measure. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the draughts that the surgeons used to bring sleep before their work. We come now to one of the more remarkable aspects of medieval medicine, and one that touches again on the serious matter of pain and its relief. The use of sleeping draughts by the surgeons of the age, potions intended to bring sleep or insensibility so that painful procedures might be endured. We shall treat this gently and without detail, for our purpose is only to understand its place in the medical world, not to dwell on the difficult matter of medieval surgery itself. Surgery in the medieval age was, of necessity, a fearful business, for the surgeons had to perform their work without any of the reliable means of preventing pain that we now possess, in an age when the relief of the agony of an operation was one of the greatest of medical challenges. Faced with this, the healers of the age sought ways to bring sleep or insensibility to the patient, to dull the awareness of pain during the ordeal of surgery, and among their resources were the sleeping draughts, potions compounded from various powerful plants, known to have the effect of bringing sleep or stupor. These draughts represented an attempt, however imperfect, to address the terrible problem of pain in surgery, to grant the suffering patient some relief from the full awareness of the ordeal. The draughts drew upon the plants that were known to have powerful effects upon the mind and body, the herbs that could bring sleep or insensibility, combined in the preparations that the medical knowledge of the age had devised. These were among the most potent and dangerous of the plants in the medieval pharmacy, substances whose powerful effects made them both useful for this purpose and perilous to employ, and the draughts made from them were correspondingly powerful and hazardous. The knowledge of how to prepare such draughts was part of the learned medical tradition, passed down in the texts and practiced by those versed in the surgical art, a specialized and dangerous knowledge concerned with the difficult problem of bringing sleep to the suffering. The great danger of these draughts lay precisely in their power, for the same potency that could bring the desired sleep could also, if the preparation was too strong or the patient too vulnerable, do serious harm. This was a perilous business, balanced on a knife's edge between the sleep that was sought and the harm that could follow, and the medical understanding of the age recognized the danger clearly. The very substances that could grant relief from the agony of surgery were among the most dangerous known, and their use required the greatest care and carried real risk, a sobering reflection of how difficult and perilous the relief of pain was in an age that lacked the safe and reliable means we now possess. It was a dangerous remedy for a desperate need. We shall not describe the composition or preparation of these draughts, for that is not our concern tonight, and the details need not trouble our quiet journey. What matters is simply to understand that the medieval world, faced with the terrible problem of pain in surgery, sought what relief it could in these sleeping draughts, drawing on the powerful plants of its pharmacy to bring sleep or insensibility to the suffering, in a practice that was both a genuine attempt at mercy and a dangerous and imperfect one. It stands as a striking example of the resourcefulness and the limitations of medieval medicine, its earnest effort to address one of the hardest of all medical problems with the dangerous and imperfect means at its disposal. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to some of the powerful and dangerous plants themselves and to the lore that surrounded them. Among the plants of the medieval pharmacy were some that held a particular fascination and fear, plants of real power and real danger, surrounded by lore and legend, used in medicine with great caution, and regarded with a mixture of respect and dread. These were the powerful and poisonous plants, and we shall consider them gently and without any detail of their use, for our interest is in the lore and the place they held in the medieval imagination, not in anything practical. These plants were known to be poisonous, capable of causing serious harm or worse, and yet they also had recognized uses in medicine, for in the thinking of the age, even a poisonous plant might have healing virtues if used rightly and in the proper way. This dual nature, at once dangerous and potentially useful, gave these plants a special place in the medieval pharmacy. Substances to be handled with the greatest caution, respected for their power and feared for their danger, used only by those who understood them and only with the greatest care. The line between medicine and poison was, for these plants, a very fine one, a matter of knowledge and care, and they stood at the perilous edge of the healer's art, where the power to heal and the power to harm were most closely intertwined. Among the most famous of these plants was the mandrake, a plant surrounded by an extraordinary body of legend and lore, its strangely shaped root, which could resemble a human figure, giving rise to all manner of beliefs about its magical properties and the dangers of gathering it. The mandrake was the subject of remarkable stories, tales of the perils of uprooting it, of the cries it was said to give, of the elaborate precautions supposedly needed to gather it safely, a whole mythology that surrounded this strange and potent plant. These legends reflected the awe and fear that such powerful plants inspired, the sense that they held mysterious and dangerous powers, that they belonged to the uncanny borderland between the natural and the supernatural. The mandrake, with its human-shaped root and its fearsome legends, was perhaps the most mythologized of all the plants of the medieval pharmacy. Other powerful plants, too, were known and used with caution, plants whose potent effects upon the mind and body made them both dangerous and, in careful use, valuable, surrounded by their own lore and handled with their own precautions. These were the plants that could bring sleep or stupor, that could affect the mind and the senses, that carried real dangers alongside their uses, and they were regarded with the wariness that their power demanded. The knowledge of these plants, their dangers and their cautious uses, was part of the specialized lore of the healers, a dangerous knowledge held by those who understood the perilous plants and knew the great care their use required. They belonged to the darker and more dangerous corner of the medieval pharmacy, the realm of the powerful and the perilous. The lore and fear surrounding these dangerous plants reflect something important about the medieval relationship with the natural world, a sense that plants held real and mysterious powers, that the green world was full of hidden virtues and dangers, that certain plants in particular belonged to the uncanny margins where the natural shaded into the magical. These powerful and poisonous plants, with their dangers and their legends, embodied this sense of the mysterious potency of nature, the awe and fear that the more dangerous of its gifts inspired. They were treated with a caution that was practical and a dread that was almost superstitious, standing at the perilous and mysterious edge of the medieval understanding of the natural world. Let that eerie picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a plant of much humbler and more everyday use, the hemp that served so many purposes. Not all of the notable plants of medieval England were rare or dangerous or surrounded by legend. Some were humble, everyday crops, grown widely and used for the most ordinary and practical of purposes, and among these was a plant that served the medieval world in many useful ways: hemp. For hemp was an important and common crop in medieval England, valued above all for its practical uses, a plant woven into the ordinary material life of the age. The great value of hemp lay in its fibers, the strong and useful fibers that could be extracted from the plant and made into a whole range of essential products. From hemp were made ropes and cords, the strong lines that were needed for so many purposes, from the rigging of ships to the countless everyday uses of rope, in a world that depended heavily upon it. From hemp, too, was made cloth, a coarse and durable fabric used for many practical purposes, and other useful materials besides. Hemp was thus a crop of real economic and practical importance, grown for the valuable fibers it yielded, essential to the making of the ropes and textiles and other products on which medieval material life depended. It was, above all, a practical plant, a source of the strong fibers that served so many needs. The cultivation of hemp was widespread, for the demand for its fibers was considerable, and it was grown in many places to supply the need for rope and cloth and the other products made from it. The growing and processing of hemp, the extraction and preparation of its fibers, was a significant part of the agricultural and manufacturing life of the age, providing the raw material for essential products. So important was hemp to the practical needs of the age, particularly for the ropes required by shipping and other uses, that its cultivation was at times actively encouraged. a measure of the value placed upon this useful crop. Hemp was a plant of real and recognized importance, grown widely for the practical necessities it supplied. The plant also had some recognized uses in medicine, for like so many plants, it was credited with certain medicinal virtues and featured in some of the remedies of the age, used in the treatment of various ailments according to the medical understanding of the time. These medicinal uses were part of the broad tradition of herbal medicine that drew upon so many plants, and hemp took its place among the many herbs credited with healing properties, employed in remedies for particular conditions. This was a minor aspect of the plant's importance compared to its great practical value for its fibers, but it was part of the medieval understanding of hemp, one more of the many plants that the herbal medicine of the age drew upon in its remedies. Hemp thus stands as an example of the humbler and more practical side of the plants of medieval England, a common and useful crop, valued above all for the strong fibers that served the material needs of the age, grown widely and processed into the ropes and cloth and other products on which so much depended, with a minor place too in the herbal medicine of the age. It reminds us that the world of medieval plants was not only one of rare drugs and dangerous herbs and mysterious lore, but also one of humble, everyday crops serving the ordinary practical needs of life, the useful plants woven into the material fabric of the age. Let that homely picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the precious and exotic substances that came from far away, the spices that the medieval world so prized. Among the most prized and precious of all the substances that reached medieval England were the spices, the aromatic and flavorful products carried from distant lands, valued not only for the taste they gave to food, but for their supposed medicinal virtues and their sheer rarity and expense. For spices held a remarkable place in the medieval world, costly and exotic, esteemed for many reasons, symbols of wealth and luxury, as well as ingredients of both cookery and medicine. The spices came from far away, from distant lands beyond the knowledge of most medieval people, carried along the long and difficult trade routes that connected medieval Europe to the distant regions where the spices grew. This great distance and the difficulty and expense of the journey made the spices costly and precious, luxury goods that commanded high prices and were available only to those who could afford them. The trade in spices was a significant and valuable one, a major part of the commerce that connected distant parts of the world, and the spices that reached England had travelled vast distances to arrive, carrying with them the allure of the exotic and the far-off. Their very remoteness added to their value and their mystique. Spices were valued, first, for the flavour and interest they gave to food, prized in the cookery of those who could afford them, used to season and enhance dishes, and to display the wealth and refinement of the host. In the kitchens of the wealthy, spices were used to create rich and flavourful dishes, their costly presence a mark of status and hospitality, their exotic flavours a pleasure reserved for those of means. The use of spices in cookery was thus both a culinary and a social matter, a way of enjoying rich flavours and of displaying wealth and refinement, the precious spices lending their taste and their prestige to the tables of the well-to-do. To serve spiced dishes was to display one's wealth and standing, but spices were valued too for their supposed medicinal virtues, for within the medical thinking of the age, they were credited with various beneficial properties, warming and strengthening and aiding the body in different ways, and they featured in the remedies and health regimens of the age. The healers regarded many spices as beneficial to health, possessing qualities that could help to maintain the balance of the humours and treat various ailments, and they were used in medicinal preparations as well as in cookery. This medicinal esteem added to the value of the spices, making them not only luxurious flavourings but also valued medicines, prized for the benefits to health that they were thought to bring. The line between the spice as food and the spice as medicine was, in the medieval understanding, a blurry one, for the same qualities that made them prized in cookery made them valued in medicine. In all these ways, the spices occupied a special and elevated place among the substances of medieval England, precious and exotic, valued for flavor and for medicine, and for their sheer rarity and expense, symbols of wealth and luxury, and objects of a great and valuable trade. They carried the allure of distant lands, the prestige of costly rarity, the pleasures of rich flavor, and the supposed benefits of medicinal virtue, all combined in these small and precious substances carried from far away. The medieval fascination with spices, and the great trade that supplied them, reflects the value placed upon these exotic and multi-purpose substances, among the most prized of all the things that reached the medieval world from beyond its horizons. Let that fragrant picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a sweeter substance, close to home, that served as both food and medicine, the honey of the medieval world. Not all the valued substances of medieval England came from distant lands or grew in physic gardens. One of the most prized of all was produced close to home, by the patient labor of bees, and served the medieval world as food, as drink, and as medicine, all at once. Honey. For honey held a special place in medieval life, the great sweetener of an age that had little else to sweeten with, a valued food, the source of a beloved drink, and a remedy of genuine worth. In an age before sugar was common or affordable, honey was the principal sweetener available, the thing that gave sweetness to food and drink, and this alone made it precious. Sugar, where it existed, was a rare and costly import, so that for most sweetening, the medieval world relied upon honey, prized for the sweetness it brought to an otherwise plain diet. Honey was used to sweeten foods and drinks, to preserve fruits, to make the sweet dishes that were such a treat in a world of simple fare, a valued and versatile substance that brought the pleasure of sweetness to medieval tables. The keeping of bees to produce this precious honey was accordingly a common and valued activity. The hives tended for the sweet harvest they yielded. From honey came also a beloved drink, made by fermenting honey with water, a honeyed drink that was enjoyed across the medieval world and valued as one of the pleasures of the age. This drink, sweet and warming, was made and enjoyed widely, an old and traditional beverage that made use of the precious honey to produce a drink of real appeal. It held a place alongside ale and wine among the drinks of the age, prized for its sweetness and its warming qualities, a beverage with ancient roots that continued to be enjoyed through the medieval centuries. The honeyed drink was one of the pleasures that honey made possible, a sweet and warming draught valued in its own right. But honey was valued too as a medicine, and here its worth was genuine, for honey really does possess properties that make it useful in healing, particularly in the treatment of wounds and certain other complaints. The healers of the age used honey in their remedies, applying it to wounds and using it in preparations for various ailments, and in this they were drawing on a substance of real medicinal value, for honey has genuine properties that can aid in healing. This was one of the remedies that medieval medicine got right, a substance whose healing virtues were real, valued and used with genuine benefit in the treatment of wounds and other conditions. In honey, the medieval healer possessed a remedy of authentic worth, its healing powers not mere belief, but genuine fact. Honey thus occupied a uniquely valuable place among the substances of medieval England, serving as sweetener and food, as the source of a beloved drink, and as a genuine medicine, a versatile and precious substance produced close to home by the labor of the bees. It brought sweetness to the diet, pleasure to the cup, and real healing to the sick, a substance of many virtues valued across every aspect of life. In the humble hive and its golden harvest, the medieval world found one of its most useful and beloved substances, precious in an age that had so few sweet things, and genuinely helpful in an age that had so few effective remedies. Let that sweet picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the humbler healers who served the ordinary people, the folk practitioners and wise women of the age. Away from the learned physicians and the monastery infirmaries, most of the ordinary people of medieval England, when they fell ill, turned to a different kind of healer altogether, to the local practitioners of folk medicine who served the common people in every community, the wise women and cunning folk and village healers. For it was these humble practitioners, far more than the learned physicians, who tended most of the sick of medieval England, and their remedies and lore formed the everyday medicine of the ordinary person. The learned physicians were few and costly, available mainly to the wealthy, and so for the great mass of ordinary people, medicine meant the local healer, the wise woman or cunning man who possessed knowledge of herbs and remedies and offered their help to the community. These local practitioners, often women, were repositories of practical healing knowledge, of the lore of herbs and remedies passed down through generations and gathered through experience, and they were the ones to whom ordinary people turned when illness came. They were familiar and accessible figures, part of the community they served, offering their remedies and their help to their neighbours, the everyday healers of the medieval world, for those who could not afford the learned physician. The healing offered by these folk practitioners drew above all on the herbs and plants of the local countryside, on the practical knowledge of which plants could help with which ailments, gathered and prepared into the remedies that they gave. This was a practical, experiential knowledge, learned through tradition and experience rather than through books, a lore of herbs and their uses passed down among the healers and applied to the everyday ills of the community. The wise woman knew which plants to gather and how to prepare them, which remedies to give for which complaints, a body of practical herbal knowledge that formed the basis of her healing art. It was medicine, rooted in the local plants and the inherited lore, close to the earth and the everyday, the practical healing of the ordinary world. Alongside the herbal remedies, the healing of the folk practitioners often included charms, rituals, and spoken words, the elements of what we might call magic, bound up together with the practical use of herbs in a single fabric of healing. For in the world of folk medicine, the line between the natural remedy and the magical charm was not drawn as we would draw it, and the healers freely combined the two, using herbs and words and rituals together in their treatment of the sick. A remedy might involve both the giving of a herb and the speaking of a charm, the practical and the ritual combined, in a healing that drew on both the virtues of plants and the powers believed to reside in words and rituals. This blending of the herbal and the magical was characteristic of folk medicine, a union of the practical and the supernatural in the service of healing. These folk healers, with their herbs and their charms, their practical knowledge and their rituals, served the great mass of ordinary medieval people, providing the everyday medicine of the age for those beyond the reach of the learned physicians. They were vital figures in their communities, the accessible and familiar healers to whom ordinary people turned, custodians of a practical and traditional healing lore that mingled the herbal and the magical. Their medicine was humble and local and rooted in tradition, close to the lives of the people they served, and it formed the everyday reality of healing for most of medieval England, the practical folk medicine that tended the ordinary sick. Let that homely picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the mingling of medicine with religion and magic, and to the charms and prayers that accompanied the remedies of the age. We have seen that in the world of folk medicine, the herbal remedy and the magical charm were freely combined, and this points to something important about medieval medicine as a whole, something that runs through the entire subject, and that we should pause to consider. The deep entanglement of medicine with religion and magic, the way that the healing of the age mingled the natural and the supernatural in a single fabric. For the medieval world did not separate these things as we do, and its medicine was woven through with prayer and charm and ritual. Religion, above all, was bound up intimately with medieval medicine, for in an age of deep and pervasive faith, illness and healing were understood within a religious framework, and the appeal to God and the saints was a natural part of seeking a cure. When people fell ill, they prayed for recovery, sought the intercession of the saints, and understood their sickness and healing in relation to the divine, so that religious appeal and practical remedy went hand in hand. The healing of the body and the care of the soul were not separated, and the seeking of a cure naturally included the spiritual as well as the practical, the prayer alongside the potion. This religious dimension pervaded medieval medicine, giving it a spiritual character that we would find unfamiliar, the appeal to heaven bound up with the giving of remedies. Particular saints were associated with healing, with particular ailments and cures, and were invoked by those seeking help against sickness, adding a further religious dimension to the healing of the age. There were saints to whom people turned for particular afflictions, holy figures believed to have power over certain diseases, and the appeal to these saints was a common part of seeking a cure, the sufferer praying to the appropriate holy patron for relief. Places of pilgrimage associated with healing drew those seeking cures, and the whole apparatus of saintly intercession was woven into the medieval approach to illness, offering spiritual avenues of healing alongside the practical remedies of the herbalist and physician. The saints were, in a sense, part of the medieval pharmacy, invoked for the cures they were believed to grant. Alongside the religious elements were the charms and rituals of a more magical character, the spoken words and symbolic actions believed to hold power against illness, which mingled with both the religious and the herbal elements of healing. These charms, often combining religious language with older magical traditions, were believed to have power to heal, to protect against disease, to aid in the cure of various ailments, and they were used freely alongside the herbs and the prayers. The distinction between a religious appeal and a magical charm was often blurry, the two shading into one another, and both were combined with the practical use of herbs in a healing that drew on every available source of power, natural and supernatural alike. The charm and the prayer and the herb worked together in the medieval cure. This entanglement of medicine with religion and magic reflects the fundamental character of the medieval world, in which the natural and the supernatural were not sharply divided, in which the divine and the magical were understood to act upon the world alongside the natural virtues of herbs and remedies. To the medieval mind, it made perfect sense to combine the herb with the prayer and the charm, for all were sources of power against the illness that afflicted the body, all part of a single effort to heal in a world governed by both natural and supernatural forces. This blending, so strange to us, was natural and coherent within the medieval understanding, a unified approach to healing that drew on every available power. Let that picture of the mingled cure settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the theory that underlay the learned medicine of the age, the doctrine of the four humours. We have spoken of the many remedies of medieval England, the herbs and drugs and potions, the charms and prayers, but underlying the learned medicine of the age was a coherent theory that gave it structure and logic, a way of understanding the body and its ailments that shaped how every remedy was chosen and used. This was the doctrine of the four humours, inherited from the ancient world, and it is worth understanding, for it explains the reasoning behind so much of medieval medicine. The theory held that the body contained four fluids or humours, and that health depended upon the proper balance of these humours, while illness arose when they fell out of balance, when there was too much or too little of one or another. Each humour was associated with particular qualities, with warmth or cold, moisture or dryness, and with particular temperaments and characteristics, and the balance of the humours within a person determined both their health and their nature. This was a comprehensive theory of the body, explaining health and illness, temperament and character, all in terms of the balance and quality of the four humours, a coherent framework that made sense of the workings of the body and the causes of disease. It gave the medicine of the age its fundamental logic. Within this framework, illness was understood as an imbalance of the humours an excess or deficiency that had disturbed the proper harmony of the body, and the task of healing was to restore that balance, to counter the excess or make up the deficiency and bring the humours back into their proper proportion. This gave a clear logic to treatment, for the healer sought to identify the nature of the imbalance and then to correct it, using remedies of the appropriate qualities to counter the disturbance. If an illness was understood to arise from an excess of a warm and moist humour, for instance, it might be countered with remedies of a cooling and drying nature, the opposite qualities working to restore the balance. The choice of remedy followed logically from the understanding of the imbalance, a rational system of treatment based on the theory of the humours. This is why the qualities of the various substances, their warmth or coolness, their moistness or dryness, were so important in medieval medicine, for it was by these qualities that the remedies acted to restore the humoral balance. Each herb and drug and food was understood to have its qualities, and the healer chose remedies according to their qualities and the nature of the imbalance to be corrected, matching the remedy to the ailment through the logic of the humours. This gave a systematic character to the choice of remedies, a reasoned basis for treatment, in which the qualities of the substances were carefully considered and matched to the humoral disturbance they were meant to correct. The whole vast pharmacy of the age was organized, in the learned understanding, according to this logic of qualities and humours. The doctrine of the four humours thus provided the intellectual foundation of learned medieval medicine, a coherent and comprehensive theory that explained health and illness, and gave a rational basis for treatment, however mistaken we now know it to have been. It made sense of the body and its ailments, gave logic to the choice of remedies, and structured the whole practice of learned medicine, a system inherited from the ancient world and elaborated through the medieval centuries. Understanding it helps us to see that medieval medicine, for all its errors, was not mere random superstition, but a reasoned system, coherent within its own assumptions, applying a logical framework to the treatment of disease. Let that picture of the humoral logic settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the physicians who applied this learning, and to the drafts and prescriptions they gave. At the top of the medical world of medieval England stood the learned physicians, the men educated in the theory and learning of medicine, who applied the doctrine of the humours and the inherited wisdom of the medical texts to the treatment of the sick, and whose prescriptions and drafts represented the most learned medicine of the age. We shall consider their practice soberly, for it reflects both the sophistication and the limitations of medieval learned medicine. The physician was distinguished by his learning, by his education in the theory of medicine, the doctrine of the humours, the knowledge of the medical texts and the qualities of remedies, and it was this learning that set him apart from the humbler healers and gave him his standing. He diagnosed illness according to the theory of the humours, seeking to understand the nature of the imbalance that had caused it, and prescribed remedies according to his learning, choosing substances of the appropriate qualities to correct the disturbance. His was a medicine of theory and learning, applied through careful diagnosis and reasoned prescription, the most educated and prestigious form of healing in the medieval world, available mainly to those who could afford his costly services. Among the physician's methods were various means of restoring the humoral balance that the theory prescribed, treatments intended to remove excess humours, or otherwise correct the imbalance thought to underlie the illness. There were treatments to purge the body, to remove what was thought to be the excess or corruption causing the disease, and other methods aimed at restoring the proper balance of the humours, all following from the theoretical understanding of the illness. These treatments could be drastic and reflected the logic of the humoral theory, the belief that removing excess or corrupt humours would restore health, and they were applied according to the physician's diagnosis of the humoral disturbance. We shall not dwell on the details, but these methods followed logically from the theory, however mistaken they may have been. The physician also prescribed drafts and remedies compounded from the many substances of the pharmacy, the herbs and drugs and other materials, combined according to the recipes and principles of learned medicine into the medicines that he gave. These preparations were often complex, combining many ingredients chosen for their qualities and virtues, compounded according to the learned understanding of how they should be combined to achieve the desired effect. The making of these remedies drew on the whole pharmacy of the age, and on the learned knowledge of how substances should be combined and used, producing the draughts and medicines that represented the applied wisdom of learned medicine. They were the practical expression of the physician's learning, the remedies that his knowledge and theory produced. The medicine of the learned physician thus represented the most sophisticated and educated healing of the medieval world, grounded in theory and learning, applied through diagnosis and prescription, producing the complex remedies and drastic treatments that followed from the doctrine of the humours. It was a medicine of real intellectual structure, coherent within its assumptions, however limited and mistaken it now appears, the highest expression of medieval medical learning. That it was often ineffective and sometimes harmful does not diminish the genuine learning and reasoning that lay behind it, the earnest application of the best medical knowledge the age possessed. The physician, with his learning and his draughts, stood at the summit of medieval medicine, applying its theory to the treatment of those who could afford his care. Let that picture of the learned physician settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the everyday remedies that ordinary people used for their common ills. Let us turn now from the learned physicians to the everyday remedies that ordinary people used for the common ailments of medieval life. The practical treatments reached for when the ordinary ills of the body came calling. The headaches and stomach troubles, the coughs and fevers and aches that were the common lot of medieval existence. For most illness was treated not by the learned physician but by these everyday remedies, drawn from the household stores and the local healers, the practical medicine of ordinary life. The common ailments of medieval life were many, for it was a hard age with much sickness, and people suffered from all the ordinary ills of the body, the digestive troubles and the aches and pains, the coughs and colds and fevers, the skin complaints and the wounds, and the countless minor and major afflictions that flesh is heir to. For these common ills, ordinary people turned to the remedies of everyday medicine, the herbal treatments and household preparations that formed the first line of defense against sickness. These were the remedies that most people used most of the time, the practical medicine of the household and the community, applied to the ordinary ailments that were the common experience of medieval life. Many of these everyday remedies were herbal, drawn from the plants that were believed to help with particular complaints, prepared into the teas and poultices and other simple preparations that the household could make. There were herbs for the stomach and herbs for the head, herbs to ease a cough and herbs to soothe a pain, herbs for the skin and herbs for the many other complaints, each valued for its particular virtues and used in the treatment of the ills it was thought to help. The knowledge of these remedies was widespread, part of the practical lore of the household and the community, and the herbs were prepared into simple medicines that could be made and given at home, the everyday herbal medicine of ordinary life. It was a practical, homely medicine, close to the plants and the household. Alongside the herbs were other everyday remedies of various kinds, the household preparations and simple treatments that tradition and experience had produced, the many practical measures used against the ordinary ills of life. There were foods and drinks believed to help with certain conditions, simple preparations and treatments passed down through tradition, various practical measures for the common complaints, all part of the everyday medicine of the age. These remedies drew on a broad body of practical knowledge, of what was believed to help with what, accumulated through experience and tradition, and applied to the everyday care of the sick. It was medicine of the practical and the traditional, the accumulated lore of ordinary healing. Some of these everyday remedies had real value, genuinely helping with the complaints they were used for, while others were useless or worse, but all were part of the practical medicine that ordinary people relied upon the everyday treatment of the common ills of medieval life. Whether effective or not, these remedies represented the ordinary experience of medicine for most people. The practical treatments they turned to when sickness came, drawn from the household stores and the local law and the wisdom of the community. This everyday medicine, humble and practical and traditional, was the medicine that most medieval people actually used. The ordinary reality of healing in the age, far more than the learned medicine of the physicians. Let that homely picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the darker side of all these remedies, to the perils that could come from the cure itself. For all the remedies and treatments of medieval medicine, its herbs and draughts and potions, there was a real and serious danger woven through it all. A peril that we should consider soberly. The danger that the cure itself could harm, that the remedies meant to heal could, through the ignorance and limitations of the age, do damage instead. We shall treat this gently and without dwelling on anything distressing, for it is a sobering but important part of the story. The fundamental problem was that the medieval world lacked the knowledge to use its remedies safely and effectively, to know which were helpful and which were harmful, to measure and prepare them rightly, to understand their true effects upon the body. Without this knowledge, the use of remedies was a perilous business, for many of the substances employed were powerful and potentially dangerous, and there was no reliable way to know how they should be used or what harm they might do. The remedies were given according to the theories and traditions of the age, which were often mistaken, and prepared and administered without the precise knowledge that safe use required, so that the treatment could easily do harm. The danger lay in the very ignorance that pervaded medieval medicine, the lack of the understanding needed to use its powerful substances safely. Some of the substances used in medicine were genuinely dangerous, powerful plants and other materials that could harm, or worse if used wrongly, and the line between a helpful dose and a harmful one was not well understood. These dangerous substances were employed in the remedies of the age, and their use carried real risks, for the knowledge to use them safely was lacking, and a preparation that was too strong, or a substance that was mistaken, or a treatment that was ill-judged, could do serious harm. The perils were real, woven into the use of the more powerful remedies, and the sufferer who took a medicine might be harmed as much as helped by it, the cure itself a source of danger. This was one of the sobering realities of medieval medicine, the peril that lay within its very remedies. Beyond the dangers of particular substances, there were the harms that came from mistaken treatments, from the drastic methods that the theories of the age prescribed, from the treatments that weakened rather than strengthened the sick. The logic of the humours led to treatments that could harm, drastic measures that drew on the mistaken understanding of disease, and these could do real damage to the already sick, weakening them further or worsening their condition. The very theories that gave medieval medicine its logic could lead to harmful treatment, for the understanding they were based on was wrong, and the treatments that followed from them could injure rather than heal. The peril lay not only in dangerous substances, but in the mistaken framework that guided their use. Yet we should be fair to the medieval healers, who acted according to the best knowledge they had, seeking to help the sick with the understanding and the remedies available to them, not knowing the dangers that we now recognize. The harms of medieval medicine were harms of ignorance, not of ill intent, done by people trying earnestly to heal in an age that lacked the knowledge for safe and effective medicine. They used the remedies and the treatments that their age believed in, doing their best with what they had, and if the results were sometimes harmful, it was because they could not know what we now know. The perils of the cure were real, but they were the perils of a world doing its best in ignorance, not of carelessness or cruelty. Let that sober reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to something closer to our own quiet purpose tonight, the remedies the age used for sleep and the troubled mind. Since our own purpose tonight is the gentle pursuit of sleep, it seems fitting to pause on how the medieval world approached the very things we seek now, the rest and calm and easing of the troubled mind that we ourselves are after as we drift towards sleep. For the people of medieval England, like people of every age, suffered from sleeplessness and worry and low spirits, and they had their own remedies and approaches for these troubles, their own ways of seeking the rest and calm that the mind and body need. Sleeplessness was a trouble known to the medieval world as it is to us, and there were remedies believed to help bring sleep, gentle preparations from herbs thought to have soothing and sleep-inducing properties, used to help the wakeful find their rest. Certain herbs were valued for their calming and sleep-bringing virtues, and were used in gentle preparations intended to ease the passage into sleep, to quiet the restless mind and body, and invite the rest that would not come. These were among the gentler remedies of the age, the mild herbal preparations for the common trouble of sleeplessness, reflecting the timeless human search for rest when sleep proves elusive. The medieval sufferer from a wakeful night, like us, sought something to help them find their sleep. The troubled mind, the low spirits and melancholy and worry that afflict the human heart, were also known to the medieval world and understood within its framework of the humours, for certain states of mind were associated with particular humoral conditions and were treated accordingly. Low spirits and heaviness of heart were understood in terms of the humoral theory, associated with a particular humour thought to produce such states, and were treated with remedies and regimens intended to counter that humour and lift the spirits. The medieval world thus had its own understanding of the troubled mind, and its own approaches to easing it, drawn from the theory of the humours and the remedies it prescribed, an early attempt to address the sufferings of the spirit as well as the body. Beyond the herbal remedies, the medieval approach to rest and calm drew on other measures too, on the regimens of living that were thought to promote health and tranquility, on the ordering of one's life and habits to encourage rest and ease. There was an understanding that the way one lived, one's habits and surroundings and the ordering of one's days affected one's health and one's rest, and advice was given on how to live in a way that promoted calm and well-being. This attention to the regimen of life, to the habits and conditions that fostered rest and health, reflected a recognition that well-being depended on more than remedies alone, that the ordering of one's life played its part in the calm and rest that one sought. It was a gentle and holistic understanding, attentive to the whole pattern of living. There is something rather comforting in the thought that the people of medieval England, so long ago and so different from us in so many ways, sought the same gentle things we seek, the rest and calm and quiet that the troubled mind and weary body need, and had their own remedies and approaches for finding them. Across all the centuries that separate us, this common human search for rest and ease connects us to them, a shared longing for the peace of sleep and the calming of the troubled heart. As you lie there now, drifting toward your own rest, you are seeking what medieval people sought too, the gentle easing into sleep, the quieting of the restless mind, a longing as old as humanity itself. Let that gentle thought settle softly in the dark. We turn now to how the age controlled and regulated its most common substance, the ale, through law and custom. We have seen how central ale was to medieval life, and how the age was aware of the harms that drink could bring. And this brings us to an interesting aspect of the medieval relationship with the substances it used, the ways in which they were controlled and regulated, through law and custom and the authority of the Church. For the medieval world did not leave its most important substances entirely unregulated, but sought to control their quality, their price, and their use, in various ways that reflect the importance it attached to them. The most notable example was the regulation of ale, that essential everyday drink, whose quality and price were controlled by law and overseen by officials, a measure of how important ale was to the life of the community. There were laws governing the price at which ale could be sold, seeking to ensure that this essential drink was available at a fair price, and there were officials charged with checking the quality of the ale that was sold, guarding against adulteration and poor brewing. This regulation of ale reflected its central importance to daily life, the concern to ensure that this essential substance was sold fairly and was of proper quality, a matter of real public importance, overseen by law and custom. The very fact that ale was so regulated shows how vital it was to the medieval world. The Church, too, exercised a kind of authority over the use of substances, particularly through its moral teaching on the sin of excess, its counsel of moderation and temperance, its condemnation of drunkenness and gluttony. Through its teaching and its influence over the consciences of the faithful, the Church sought to guide the use of drink and other pleasures, promoting moderation and warning against excess, a form of moral regulation that shaped behavior through conscience and belief. This was a different kind of control from the laws governing ale, working through moral teaching and religious authority rather than through officials and penalties, but it too sought to govern the use of substances, guiding people toward moderation and away from harmful excess. The Church's moral authority was a real force in shaping how the substances of the age were used. There were also various customs and communal expectations that governed the use of drink and other substances, the social norms and shared understandings that shaped behavior within the community, encouraging moderation and discouraging excess through the pressure of custom and opinion. The community had its expectations about proper behavior, its disapproval of those who drank to excess or otherwise abused the substances of the age, and these social pressures worked alongside the formal laws and the moral teaching of the Church to shape the use of drink and other things. This informal regulation, through custom and communal expectation, was a further layer of control, guiding behavior through the powerful force of social norms and shared understanding. Together with law and church, custom helped to govern the use of the substances of the age. These various forms of control and regulation, through law and church and custom, reflect the medieval recognition that the substances it relied upon needed to be governed, that their use had to be guided and their quality assured and their excesses restrained. It was not a world of unregulated indulgence, but one that sought, in its own ways, to control and order the use of the substances that were so important to its life, balancing their value against their dangers, promoting their proper use, and restraining their abuse. This concern with regulation and control, however different in its methods from our own, reflects a recognition as old as human society that the powerful substances we rely upon must be governed if their benefits are to be enjoyed and their harms restrained. Let that thoughtful picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the wider world from which so many of the precious substances of the age arrived, the great trade that supplied them. Many of the most precious substances of medieval England, the costly spices and exotic drugs and rare materials, came not from England at all, but from distant lands, carried across vast distances by the great networks of trade that connected medieval Europe to the wider world. This trade in precious substances is a fascinating aspect of the story, revealing how the medieval world reached out across great distances to obtain the things it valued, and how England was connected, through commerce, to lands far beyond its horizons. The precious substances of the East, the spices and drugs and other valuable materials that grew in distant lands, were carried westward along the long trade routes that connected those far regions to Europe, passing through many hands and many places on their long journey. These routes stretched across enormous distances, linking the sources of the precious substances to the markets of Europe, and the goods that travelled them passed through a great chain of merchants and middlemen, each adding to the cost, until they arrived at last in the European markets and made their way to England. The journey was long and difficult and expensive, and this was reflected in the high cost of the substances that completed it, the precious spices and drugs that had travelled so far to reach the English apothecary and kitchen. The great distance and difficulty of this trade was part of what made the exotic substances so valuable, for their rarity and the expense of obtaining them gave them their high worth, and the merchants who dealt in them could command great prices. The trade in these precious goods was a source of significant wealth, a valuable commerce that enriched those who controlled it, and it was pursued with vigor despite its difficulties because of the great value of the substances involved. The costliness of the exotic drugs and spices reflected the whole long chain of trade that brought them, the distances travelled and the hands they passed through, and the risks and expenses of the journey, all adding to the price of these precious substances by the time they reached England. Their value was, in large part, the value of their long journey. This trade connected medieval England, in a real way, to distant parts of the world, bringing to it the products of far-off lands and linking it, through the chain of commerce, to regions its people would never see and could scarcely imagine. The spices in the wealthy kitchen, the exotic drugs in the apothecary's shop, were tangible connections to distant lands, physical evidence of the reach of trade across the medieval world, bringing the products of far regions to English shores. Through this commerce, medieval England was part of a wider world, connected by the flow of precious goods to distant lands, its markets receiving the products of far-off places through the great networks of medieval trade. The exotic substances were, in a sense, ambassadors of distant lands, carrying the far world into the heart of medieval England. The trade in precious substances thus reveals the medieval world as more connected and far-reaching than we might imagine, reaching across great distances to obtain the things it valued, linked by commerce to lands far beyond its own borders. The spices and drugs that reached England, having travelled so far, testify to the extent of medieval trade and the lengths to which people would go to obtain the precious substances they desired, connecting the medieval English world to the wider world through the flow of valuable goods. It is a reminder that the Middle Ages, often imagined as insular and isolated, were in fact connected to distant lands through the great networks of trade that carried precious substances across the world. Let that far-reaching picture settle gently in the dark. We turn now to consider what the medicine of the age actually got right, the remedies that truly worked. Having journeyed through the vast and various pharmacy of medieval England, with its herbs and drugs and potions, its theories and remedies, we should pause to ask a fair question. For all its errors and limitations, what did medieval medicine actually get right? For it would be wrong to dismiss the whole of it as mere superstition and error, and there was, in truth, real value in some of what the age knew and did, genuine successes amid the failures. The clearest of these successes lay in the realm of herbal medicine, for among the many herbs used by medieval healers were some that genuinely possessed the healing properties attributed to them, that really did help with the ailments they were used to treat. Long experience had taught people which plants could soothe a particular complaint, ease a certain pain, help with a specific trouble, and some of this accumulated knowledge was genuinely sound, identifying the real virtues of particular herbs. Certain plants really did have beneficial effects, and the traditional knowledge that recognized and used them captured real truths about the healing powers of the natural world, truths discovered through long experience and passed down through the generations. In these herbs, medieval medicine possessed remedies of genuine value. Beyond the specific herbs, there was value in the broad approach of much everyday medicine, in the attention to rest and diet and care, in the gentle remedies and the practical measures that supported the body's own healing. Much of what the folk healers and the household remedies offered was gentle and supportive, aimed at comforting the sick and aiding their recovery. And this kind of care had real value even when it did not cure, for it supported the sufferer and eased their distress. The attention to rest, to nourishment, to comfort and care reflected a sound instinct about the conditions that favour recovery, and this supportive care was a genuine contribution of medieval medicine, valuable in its own right, even apart from any specific cure. The care itself could help, comforting the sick and supporting the body's own healing powers. There was value, too, in the accumulated practical wisdom of the age, in the knowledge born of long experience with illness and its treatment, which, for all its errors, contained real insights amid the mistakes. Generations of experience with the sick had taught the healers many things, some of them genuinely useful, about the course of illnesses and the effects of remedies and the care of the suffering, a practical wisdom accumulated over long ages. This experiential knowledge, though mixed with error and mistaken theory, contained real truths discovered through observation and practice, genuine insights into illness and healing that experience had taught. Amid all the errors of medieval medicine, this hard-won practical wisdom preserved real knowledge of value, the fruit of long experience with the sick. Some particular examples stand out as genuine successes. Honey, as we have seen, was used on wounds with real benefit, for it truly does help in healing. Certain plants used to ease pain contained substances that genuinely dulled it. Some of the herbs given to calm the stomach, or to soothe a cough, or to help bring sleep, really did possess the gentle virtues attributed to them, their effects grounded in the real properties of the plants, and the careful, clean tending of wounds and the sick that the better healers practiced. The washing and dressing and patient attention reflected sound instincts that genuinely aided recovery. These were not lucky accidents, but the fruit of long observation, the slow accumulation of real knowledge about which plants and practices truly helped, preserved and passed down through the generations of healers. Amid all the error, this genuine knowledge shone through, real and useful and hard-won. We should therefore be fair to medieval medicine, recognizing that amid its errors and limitations, it possessed genuine value, real remedies that worked, sound care that helped, practical wisdom born of experience. It was not simply a mass of superstition and error, but a mixture of the mistaken and the sound, containing real knowledge and genuine successes amid its many failures. The healers of the age, working with the knowledge they had, did achieve real good, easing suffering and aiding recovery through the genuine virtues of their herbs and the sound instincts of their care. In honoring the truth about medieval medicine, we must honor its real achievements, as well as recognizing its errors, giving the healers of the age their due for what they genuinely got right. Let that fair reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the other side of the ledger, to what the age got wrong. Having acknowledged the genuine achievements of medieval medicine, we must also, in fairness, consider its errors, the many things it got wrong, for these were considerable, and understanding them helps us to see both the limitations of the age and the great distance that medicine has travelled since. We shall consider these errors soberly, not to mock the medieval healers, but to understand honestly the limitations under which they worked. The most fundamental error lay in the whole theoretical framework of learned medicine, the doctrine of the humours, which, for all its coherence and logic, was simply mistaken about the nature of the body and the causes of disease. The body does not work as the theory of the humours supposed, and illness does not arise from the imbalance of four fluids, so that the whole elaborate framework that gave medieval medicine its logic was built upon a false understanding. This meant that much of the reasoning of learned medicine, however careful and coherent, was directed toward a mistaken end, seeking to correct imbalances that did not exist in the way supposed, applying a logic that rested on false foundations. The very sophistication of the humoral theory, in a sense, compounded the error, giving a persuasive structure to a fundamentally mistaken understanding. Because the underlying theory was wrong, many of the treatments that followed from it were useless or harmful, the drastic measures aimed at correcting humoral imbalances that did not exist, weakening and harming the sick rather than healing them. The treatments prescribed by the logic of the humours could do real damage, for they were directed at a false understanding of disease, and the drastic methods they involved could harm the already sick. Much of the effort of learned medicine was thus not merely ineffective, but positively harmful, the logical consequence of a mistaken theory applied to the treatment of the sick. The errors of the theory translated into errors of treatment, harming those they were meant to help. The age also lacked any understanding of the true causes of disease, of the tiny organisms that cause so much illness. And this ignorance meant that it could neither understand nor effectively prevent or treat many of the diseases that afflicted it. Without knowledge of how diseases were really caused and spread, the medieval world was helpless before many of its greatest scourges, unable to comprehend their true nature or to combat them effectively. This fundamental ignorance of the causes of disease was perhaps the greatest limitation of all, leaving the age powerless before illnesses that we can now understand and often prevent or cure, a vast realm of suffering that medieval medicine could do little against because it could not understand its true nature. And woven through it all was the mingling of medicine with magic and mistaken belief, the charms and superstitions and false ideas that accompanied the genuine knowledge, the errors of understanding that led people to trust in remedies and practices that could not truly help. Much of what passed for medicine was based on mistaken belief, on the false associations and superstitions that filled the gaps in real knowledge, leading people to place their trust in charms and remedies that had no genuine power. These errors of belief, mixed in with the genuine knowledge, meant that much medieval medicine was directed toward the useless or the false, the product of a worldview that could not distinguish the effective from the empty. Yet we should recognize that these errors were the errors of an age doing its best without the knowledge we now possess. Not the failures of foolish or careless people, but the limitations of a world that could not yet know what we know. Let that honest reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the deeper question of why they believed it all so firmly. Having seen both what medieval medicine got right and what it got wrong, we may ask the deeper question that all of it raises. Why did people believe in it so firmly, trust in remedies that often did not work, hold to theories that were mistaken, place their faith in a medicine that was so limited? The answer takes us into the nature of belief and knowledge, and helps us to understand not only the medieval world but something of our own. The first part of the answer is that medieval medicine, for all its errors, was coherent and made sense within the understanding of the age, offering a comprehensive and logical account of the body and its ailments that satisfied the need to understand and explain. The doctrine of the humours provided a complete framework explaining health and illness, giving reasons for treatments, making sense of the workings of the body, and this coherence was deeply satisfying, offering understanding and order in place of mystery and helplessness. People believed in it because it made sense, because it offered a coherent explanation of the frightening and mysterious matter of illness, a framework that gave meaning and logic to their experience. The very coherence of the system was a powerful reason for belief. The second part of the answer lies in the difficulty of knowing whether the remedies truly worked, for without the means of careful testing, it was hard to tell an effective remedy from an ineffective one, and the natural course of illness could easily be mistaken for the effect of treatment. Many illnesses resolve on their own, and when a sick person recovered after taking a remedy, it was natural to credit the remedy with the cure, even if the recovery would have happened anyway. Without any way of systematically testing whether treatments actually worked, the belief in them was constantly reinforced by the recoveries that followed their use, and rarely refuted, for the failures could be explained away and the successes credited to the treatment. This made it very difficult to discover that a remedy was useless, and easy to maintain the belief that it worked. The third part of the answer is the weight of authority and tradition. For the medicine of the age was backed by the authority of ancient and revered sources, by the accumulated tradition of centuries, by the learning of the physicians and the wisdom of the herbals, all of which lent it enormous credibility. The remedies and theories came with the authority of long tradition and revered sources, and to question them was to set oneself against the accumulated wisdom of the ages, a difficult and unlikely thing to do. People believed in medieval medicine because it was hallowed by authority and tradition, backed by the weight of centuries and the prestige of ancient learning, a body of knowledge that carried the authority of the past and the sanction of the learned. This weight of authority made belief natural and doubt difficult. When we understand all this, we see that the people of the age believed in their medicine for reasons that were entirely understandable, because it was coherent and made sense, because its effectiveness could not be easily tested, because it carried the weight of authority and tradition. They were not foolish or credulous for believing, but were responding reasonably to a body of knowledge that was coherent, constantly reinforced and backed by authority, in the absence of any means to discover its errors. And this should give us not superiority but a certain humility, for it reminds us how difficult it is to know the truth about such things, how easily a coherent and authoritative system of belief can be maintained, even when mistaken, a reflection that might make us wonder which of our own certainties a future age will look back upon with the same recognition of their limits. Let that thoughtful reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now to consider the great distance between their world and ours, and the comfort of the knowledge we now possess. As we near the end of our long journey through the pharmacy of medieval England, having seen both its genuine value and its many errors, we may find ourselves looking with new eyes at the medicine of our own time, and feeling, perhaps, a quiet and unaccustomed gratitude for the knowledge we now possess, so easily taken for granted. For the distance between the medieval world of medicine and our own is vast, and reflecting on it can give us a deeper appreciation of the safe and effective medicine we are fortunate enough to enjoy. Consider the transformation in our understanding of the body and disease, the replacement of the mistaken theory of the humours with a true understanding of how the body works and what causes illness. We now understand the real causes of disease, the tiny organisms and the many other factors that cause sickness. And this true understanding has replaced the elaborate but mistaken framework of the humours, giving us a genuine comprehension of illness, where the medieval world had only a coherent error. This transformation in understanding underlies all the achievements of modern medicine, the replacement of mistaken theory with true knowledge, allowing us to understand and combat disease as the medieval world never could. It is a difference not of degree but of kind, a whole new comprehension of the body and its ailments. Consider too the transformation in the safety and effectiveness of remedies, the development of medicines that are tested and understood, whose effects are known and whose dangers are controlled, so different from the perilous and uncertain remedies of the medieval world. We now have medicines that have been carefully tested to determine whether they truly work and how they should be safely used. A vast pharmacy of effective and understood remedies that can treat conditions the medieval world was helpless against. The uncertainty and danger that pervaded medieval medicine, the not knowing whether a remedy would help or harm, has been replaced by knowledge and testing and control, giving us remedies we can trust and use safely. This transformation has made medicine effective and safe in a way the medieval world could never have imagined. Consider the sheer scope of what modern medicine can now do, the diseases it can cure and prevent, the pain it can relieve, the suffering it can ease, so far beyond anything the medieval world could achieve. Conditions that were once a death sentence can now be cured. Pain that once could not be relieved can now be eased safely and reliably. Diseases that once swept away multitudes can now be prevented. The scope of modern medicine's power, its ability to heal and prevent and relieve, would seem miraculous to the medieval healer, a power over illness and suffering beyond anything their age could attain. We live with an access to effective medicine that is one of the great blessings of our time, easily forgotten until we consider the alternative. To reflect on all this is to feel a proper gratitude for the medicine of our own age, for the knowledge and safety and effectiveness we so easily take for granted, brought into focus by the contrast with the medieval world we have wandered through tonight. The medieval healers did their best with what they had, and we honour them for it. But we are fortunate beyond their imagining in the medicine we now possess, the true understanding and the safe and effective remedies, and the vast power over illness that modern knowledge has given us. To remember their world is to appreciate our own more deeply, to feel gratitude for the great gift of modern medicine, so easily forgotten and so precious. Let that grateful reflection settle gently in the dark. We turn now, more tenderly, to the human beings behind all these remedies, the people of the age. As our journey draws toward its close, let us turn from the remedies and theories to the human beings who lie behind them all. For behind every herb and potion and treatment were real people, the healers who sought to help and the sufferers who sought relief, as human as ourselves, and it is in remembering them that we find the deepest meaning in our journey through the pharmacy of the medieval world. Think of the healers of the age, the physicians and apothecaries, the monks and wise women and village practitioners who devoted themselves to the care of the sick, seeking to ease suffering and restore health with the knowledge and remedies they had. Whatever the errors of their medicine, they were, for the most part, people trying to help, applying their knowledge and their care to the relief of the suffering, doing their best in a hard world with the understanding available to them. There is something honourable in this, in the effort to heal, the dedication to the care of the sick, the earnest application of such knowledge as they possessed to the relief of pain and illness. The healers of the age, for all the limitations of their medicine, were engaged in a genuinely humane endeavour, the age-old effort to comfort and cure the suffering. Think of the sufferers, the ordinary people who fell ill and sought relief, who took the remedies and endured the treatments, who hoped for cure and comfort in the face of pain and sickness, as we do when we are ill. They knew the fear and misery of illness, the longing for relief, the hope placed in remedies, the same experiences that we know when sickness comes to us, for the experience of being ill and seeking help is a deeply human one, shared across all the ages. Their suffering was real, their hope was real, their relief when a remedy helped was real, and in all of this they were entirely like us, human beings facing the universal trials of illness and seeking the universal comfort of a cure. We can recognize ourselves in them, in their suffering and their hope, across all the distance of the years. Think of the universal human realities that lie behind the whole story, the pain that sought relief, the sleeplessness that sought rest, the illness that sought cure, the suffering that sought comfort, the same needs and longings that we know in our own lives. The whole vast pharmacy of the medieval world, with all its herbs and drugs and potions, existed to meet these universal human needs, the needs for relief from pain, for rest from sleeplessness, for cure from illness, for comfort in suffering, needs as old as humanity and as present in us as in them. Behind all the strange remedies and mistaken theories were these timeless human needs, the same that we feel, connecting us to the medieval sufferers across all the centuries through the shared experience of the body and its ills. In remembering the human story beneath the remedies, we move beyond the mere cataloguing of medieval medicine to a deeper and more sympathetic understanding, seeing in the healers and sufferers of the age not curiosities but fellow human beings, engaged in the same struggles with illness and pain and the longing for relief that we know ourselves. They sought what we seek, relief and comfort and healing, and they met their trials with the courage and hope that ordinary people have always shown, deserving our sympathy and our recognition of our shared humanity. Behind all the strange pharmacy of the medieval world beats the same human heart, seeking the same relief that beats in us tonight. Let that tender recognition settle gently in the dark. We turn now to our final gentle thought, the thread that connects us to them across the years. As our long night draws toward its close, let us hold one final gentle thought, a thought that reaches across all the centuries between the medieval world and our own, and finds, in the end, a deep and human connection. For all the strangeness of their remedies and beliefs, The people of medieval England were, at bottom, human beings just like us. And in contemplating their world, we are contemplating, in a sense, our own distant kin, joined to us by an unbroken thread of humanity. The medieval healers and sufferers were part of the same long human story of which we are a part. The endless human effort to understand and ease the sufferings of the body, to find relief from pain and rest from sleeplessness and cure from illness. We stand in the same tradition, engaged in the same age-old struggle against sickness and suffering, heirs to the long human effort to heal that stretches back through the medieval world and far beyond. The knowledge we now possess was built upon the long labours of those who came before, including the medieval healers, who kept alive the tradition of medicine and passed it down, contributing their part, however limited, to the great and continuing endeavour of understanding and easing the ills of the body. We are the inheritors of their long effort, carrying forward the work they were part of, and the humanity we share with them is deep and real. For beneath all the differences of knowledge and belief, they felt what we feel when illness comes, the same fear and pain and longing for relief, the same hope placed in a remedy, the same comfort found in care. The experience of being ill and seeking help, of suffering and hoping for relief, of longing for the rest and healing that the body needs, is a deeply human one, shared by the medieval sufferer and by us, connecting us across all the distance of the centuries. In their illness and their hope, their suffering and their seeking of relief, we can recognize our own, the same human experience of the body and its ills, binding all the generations together in a common humanity. There is something steadying and gentle in this thought, this sense of connection across the distance of time to the people who lived and suffered and sought healing in that distant age. They are gone now, every one of them, the healers and the sufferers alike. The whole vast world of medieval medicine passed into history, its people long at rest. But they were here, they lived, they suffered, and hoped and sought relief as we do, and we are the heirs of their long effort to heal, carrying forward the human story of which they were a part. To remember them, even through the strange lens of their remedies and beliefs, is to feel our connection to the whole long procession of humanity, the generations who came before us, seeking as we seek the relief of suffering and the comfort of healing. And so we can let them rest now, the healers and sufferers of that distant age, with a kind of tenderness and gratitude, a recognition of our shared humanity and our debt to them across the years. Their remedies were often strange, and their beliefs often mistaken, but they were human beings like ourselves, seeking to heal and to be healed, and from their long labours grew, in time, the medicine we now enjoy. Let that gentle sense of connection settle over you now, warm and quiet, as we prepare at last to let the whole long story go and drift away into sleep. Let it carry you gently toward rest, this thought of the long human family of which you are a part, stretching back through the medieval night and far beyond. We turn now, at last, toward sleep. So let it all go now, gently, the whole long world we have wandered through tonight, the entire strange and fascinating world of medieval medicine and its remedies. Let it fade, the way the past fades, the way the years dissolve into a soft and shapeless distance, the ale-houses and the apothecaries, the physic gardens and the herb-scented infirmaries, the potions and the poultices and the old remedies, all growing dim and quiet and far away, until there is only the warm dark and your own slow breathing and the gathering tide of sleep. Let the apothecary's shop grow dim, its jars and shelves fading into shadow. Let the physic gardens settle into the quiet of evening, their herbs still and dark in the fading light. Let the monastery infirmaries grow silent, their careful monks at rest, their remedies set aside. Let the whole great world of medieval healing, all the healers and sufferers who filled it, Drift gently away into the deep dark of the past, all of them long at rest now, all of them beyond all pain and sickness and care. They are gone now, every one of them, their sufferings long since ended, their labours long since done, generations upon generations at rest, and there is a great soft quiet where all their striving once was. Let them rest, and now, at last, so can you. Feel the warmth of your bed, soft and safe around you. Feel the weight of the blanket, gentle upon you. Feel how your body is held, how there is nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be, no pain to fear, no remedy to take, no sickness to endure, only the soft dark and the deep quiet and the simple comfort of rest. Feel your breathing slow and your shoulders soften, and the small cares of the day loosen their grip, one by one, and drift away into the dark like distant lights going out across a sleeping land, until there is only you, and the warmth, and the deep and rising quiet. And feel perhaps a quiet gratitude as you lie there, safe and comfortable in your own time, for the gentle rest that comes so easily now, for a world in which pain can be eased, and sickness healed, and sleep can come softly and safely, without the perils and uncertainties of that distant age. You are well, and you are safe, and you are free simply to rest, to sink into sleep without fear or trouble, in a world made gentler by all the long labours of those who came before. There is nothing to fear and nothing to endure, only the soft surrender to sleep, the gentle sinking down into the warm and shapeless dark, where all is quiet and all is well. The whole long story we have travelled, the whole strange world of medieval medicine, can simply be set down now and released, dissolving into the warm dark, leaving you weightless and at peace, drifting gently down into sleep. And if any last image still lingers at the edge of your thoughts, some quiet herb garden, some shelf of old remedies, some scene from that distant age, let it grow soft now, and slow and distant, the way a story fades as you slip past its edge into sleep, the images dimming, the sounds receding, the whole long medieval world dissolving quietly into the warm and shapeless dark. You can simply let it drift away, like the day itself, like the past itself, out into the quiet and gone. Good night, traveller. The old world of herbs and potions and healers is at peace, all its remedies long set aside, all its people long at rest, and you are safe, and warm and well, and so, at last, you may rest too. Rest easy, sleep deep. I'll be here, somewhere in the quiet, when you wake.